Welcome to the selected ones. Do not mix their apologies with wisdom. Regret is sometimes just another word for horror. Let it soak in. What if I told you that the people who used to mock your distress are now wide-eyed, sleepless, and secretly spinning because you did not return? Here's the twist. According to experts, when a narcissist loses a critical source of validation that they believed would never go away, their brain perceives it as a loss of control, ego, and the version of reality in which they still had access to your energy. They are not simply sad. They're actually losing their minds. So guess what? The selected one. They expected you to fold. They gamble on your kindness, forgiveness, and past acts of sacrifice. But now you're a whole other frequency, and it's slowly killing them. It's like witnessing someone frantically try to connect to a power source that has been permanently disconnected while blaming the socket for altering their messages. Was left to read. The crocodile tears dried on your doormat, and they're now pacing about as if they lost their wallet, keys, and sanity. However, they no longer have access to you. And let us be honest, the only answer they sought was a backdoor into your component. So let's take a look at why your no is driving them nuts spiritually, and why your growth is sending shockwaves through their system. And the reason you went away was not the end. It was the unmasking. Buckle up. Because at the end of this, you will not just understand their enthusiasm. You will thank yourself for not looking back. Let's go. Number 1, they never imagined you could establish an identity outside of their influence. They never believed you could establish an identity independent of their influence. That's the truth. They never anticipated you to be alone with your thoughts. You were helpful to them, not just because of what you offered, but also because it was so easy to shape you via guilt, manipulation, and confusion. They had a false sense of power since it seemed for a while that you needed their permission to breathe. However, when you started to heal, when you finally saw through the layers of control and stopped dancing to their dysfunction, something inside them shattered. They never planned for your advancement. This was not in their plans. They figured they'd always be able to trigger a few emotional responses and entice you back in. They wanted you to be polite, loyal, and immersed in the role. They trapped you in that situation and made them feel protected. It made them feel superior. They seemed sturdy as long as you question yourself. But you are no longer playing the same game. You are not seeking their approval, validation, or even understanding. And this is when the infatuation begins. Not with your partner, but with their loss of control. They don't miss you. They miss the version of you that tolerated being misunderstood, abused, and manipulated. They miss having someone to mess up and yet expect commitment from. They are no longer heartbroken when they see you unflappable, stable, and radiant. They're upset. You were supposed to stay the same. You were supposed to need them. You were supposed to return when they whistled. But you didn't. You have outgrown their anguish. And this makes them feel small in front of someone like that. Your recuperation entails a personal risk. They're not confused by what happened. They do not comprehend how you did it without them. They don't comprehend how you got back up, reclaimed your self-esteem, and carried on without their apologies, validation, or assistance. That's why they're unraveling. They believe you relied on their script, not understanding you were writing your own. And now that you've revealed your true self, they're stranded on the sidelines, watching someone they can no longer recognize, influence, or control. Second, they anticipated time to heal their hold on you, not you. They anticipated time to heal their hold on you, not you. In their thoughts, all they had to do was stay quiet long enough, and you would slowly creep back. They believed your silence meant you were suffering without them, that you were merely giving the problems some time before returning to your old routines. They relied on the emotional connection that was still around your neck. They didn't expect you to use that quiet to accomplish precisely what they feared the most. Heal as they waited for the door to swing open again. You were establishing an entirely new one on the opposite side of the earth in peace. You used the misery they caused as fuel. You started asking yourself real questions. Why did I go through it? Why did I shrink? To make them feel comfortable. Why did I keep giving to someone who only took? And after you answered those questions, everything became clear. You didn't miss them. You missed your previous self. They misunderstood your goodwill for weakness. They reasoned that if they were gone long enough, your sentiments would become desperate enough to welcome them home. However, the reality was quite the reverse. You have reached emotional sobriety. You stopped romanticizing what they had brought to the table. You realized it for what it really was: emotional manipulation, dressed up as connection. You stopped blaming yourself for their behavior. You realized they had not left any voids in your life. They were whole. They are amazed that the door did not just stay shut. It vanished. You no longer respond to breadcrumbs. You are not influenced by ambiguous messaging or false accountability. You are not bewildered by their sudden reappearance, since you have now recognized they are not sorry. They're just surprised that the spell has worn off. They refuse to understand that you did not fall apart without them. It was never about love. It was always about control. They anticipated time to wear you down, but it really set you free. They're now caught in the past, trying to figure out how the person they thought they broke has moved on too far to look back. Number 3. Your absence is more than just a hole. It's a reflection they can't escape. Your absence is not only an emptiness. They don't just miss you the way others miss someone who has moved away or stopped texting. It goes far deeper than that. You went away, creating a mirror, and now they must face the one thing they have always avoided: themselves. While you were around, they could project everything onto you. You were their emotional dumping ground, their distraction, their reason for not growing. As long as you were there, they could avoid blame. But now that you're gone, there's nowhere to hide. They used to blame you for everything. You were very sensitive, too quiet, and overly emotional. Now that you've left, the plot is unraveling. The noise stopped, but tranquility did not come. Instead, they are stuck by their own deafening echo. You were the one who accepted their dysfunction instead of fighting dirty. You showed grace when it was not required. You've forgiven something that should have shattered you. But now that you aren't there to absorb their filth, it's all rushing back at them, raw, unfiltered, and uncontrolled. They don't just miss your presence. They miss the way you made them feel about themselves. You reduced the effect of their flaws. You made them feel human, even when they acted inhumanly. You extended them a type of love. They didn't turn. Now that it's gone, everyone can see who they really are without your protection. It's not flattering. It's not easy. And it's eating them alive. They're imprisoned, replaying conversations in their brains and trying to rewrite history to feel better about it. But nothing works. The version of yourself that would accept guilt or work to make things right is no longer available. All that remains is a reminder of how badly they treated you. And it's louder than they expected. They did not just lose a person. They lost their mirror, which enabled them to pretend they were better. And this is why they're whirling. Your absence indicates a disagreement. It is not calm. It is not something to disregard. It makes them confront what they did and who they did it to. You're not coming back, and that realization causes the loudest silence they've ever felt. Fourth, you were the soul that masked their decay with grace. Now the rot has been exposed. They never realized how much you protected them, not only from the consequences, but also from exposure. You weren't just being polite. You were protecting their image, covering up their flaws, smoothing down their outbursts, and making their dysfunction tolerable to others. You didn't lie for them, but your presence softened the hard edges of who they really were. You made them seem more stable, loving, and human than they ever aimed to be. And they were content in that deception because your grace made them seem wonderful in situations where they had no right to be valued. You justified bad actions. You gave the benefit of the doubt when the doubt was screaming at you to go. You shone compassion even when you were at your lowest moment. You shone light on someone who kept drawing you into the darkness. And they were so used to your covering that they mistook it for who they were rather than what you were offering. The difference is obvious now that you have gone. People are starting to notice something you've always kept quiet. Manipulation, arrogance, emotional swings, and gaslighting. It's no longer hidden behind your devotion. And without your attempts to keep everything together, they're falling apart in front of the same people they used to dazzle. The grace you projected made them seem balanced. Now that it's gone, their corruption is revealed, and they're scrambling to conceal it. But they don't have what you had. They're not just losing you. They are losing touch with a version of themselves that they loved being when you were present. And it is the most difficult element for them because, without your soul, they are alone in this world. They resemble exactly what they had spent years resisting. They don't want you back because they miss your heart. They want to borrow your light again so that others cannot see the truth. But now it's too late. The mask is off. The grace is gone. What remains is what they labored so hard to hide. The rot you never spoke about but kept hidden out of love. Number 5. They are crying for love. They are mourning for their control, which is camouflaged as love. They're not weeping because they've lost someone they care about. They are weeping because they have lost control over you. They do not know how to function without it. What they called love was never about intimacy, safety, or progress. It was about manipulation masquerading as commitment. It was all about keeping you emotionally dependent so they could feel powerful. Every compliment came with strings. Every apology had implicit rules and restrictions. Every time I missed you, it was real. I missed being able to use you without consequences. You were their emotional power source, someone they could drain and then blame for being fatigued. You gave them a safe setting in which to behave out and then pretend nothing happened. And since you were kind, loyal, and forgiving, people misinterpreted your need for approval. They regarded your empathy as a weakness they might exploit. Now that you've disengaged from the system and returned your peace, they're experiencing withdrawal rather than agony. Their emotional supply has been interrupted, and they are plunging. They're not pacing because they miss your soul. They're pacing because the leash they had around your heart snapped, leaving nothing to pull on. They no longer have access to your dedication, silence, or emotional strength, and it terrifies them. Not because they are offended, but because they understand that they cannot reclaim that type of power from anybody else. You were a unique brand of patient, forgiving, and strong. They mistook all of this for foolishness. They are now grieving. Not you, but the version of yourself that let them run the relationship while pretending it was love. They're not in love with the real you. They're captivated with the role you played. The person who consistently contributed, stayed, and made excuses. However, the feature has been discontinued. You are no longer a target for emotional blackmail. You're no longer confused by their guilt games. And they can't believe that the love they attempted to provide couldn't attract you back into the prison they once called home. They are weeping over the loss of power, which will never be regained. Number 6, your serenity. Is there insanity? It wasn't intended to be yours. Your tranquility is driving them nuts because they believe you were never intended to find it. They were banking on you to be broken, bewildered, and constantly doubting yourself. They wanted you to feel worthless so that they could feel powerful. The idea that you could heal, be happy without them, laugh, blossom, and shine in the face of all they had put you through. They are not only shocked, but also frustrated. They did not improve themselves by becoming better individuals. They promoted themselves by keeping you down. Your anguish made them feel more in control. Your stillness gave them the feeling of authority, and your constant efforts to prove your worth made them feel like gods. So you're at peace, not the artificial peace in which you bite your tongue and smile through the chaos. However, they are unable to fathom real tranquility. They can't look at it without tearing down emotionally, because your peace represents the only thing they feel they stole from you. Your ability to become whole. They remember the version of you that grieved quietly, stayed up late wondering what you had done wrong, and kept giving just to be acknowledged. That version made them feel valued. However, the new you, unconcerned, focused, and full of clarity and brightness, makes them feel small, powerless, and vulnerable. Every grin you share, every boundary you set, and every moment of bliss you have without their shadow over you tells them they failed. They didn't break you. They have not abandoned you. Shattered and enraged, you rose, and your ascent was neither loud nor stunning. It was sturdy, sleek, and straightforward. That's what drives them mad, because they know the truth. They understand how hard they tried to ruin you. They are aware of the anguish they caused and confusion they displayed. They know you should have collapsed under the weight of it all. But you didn't. You stood up, healed, and morphed into someone they could no longer recognize or control. And that type of tranquility, it is not only powerful, it's an insult to every delusion they've ever made about who had authority in your story. Number 7, they weaponize history. Now they're choking on it. They regarded your shared history as a trap, not a resource. Every time you tried to go, they dug into the past and hurled some old memory at you. An image, a tale, and a laugh. You once shared. Not to reconnect, but to renew your devotion. They realized that if they could generate enough emotion, they could skew your viewpoint. They weren't reminiscing to heal. They used nostalgia as a leash. They made you feel bad for even contemplating leaving after all we'd been through. Do you recall when I was there for you? However, the reminders were selective. They never addressed the betrayal, the emotional games, or the nights you cried yourself to sleep because they had hurt you. Only in circumstances that put them in a favorable light. It was never about love. It was all about control. Using emotional blackmail, they glorified chaos. They sought to change the narrative such that each red flag resembled a rose. They wanted you to forget about the manipulation and focus on the achievements. But now you are awake. You stopped filtering the past through desire and started seeing it clearly. And what previously seemed genuine now becomes opportunistic. What used to make you doubt your intuition now demonstrates you were right to leave. They don't know what to do now that their most potent weapon, the past you once valued, has completely lost its hold on you. They continue to dangle the past in front of you like bait, but you aren't interested. That is what is breaking them. The memories that once enticed you back are now meaningless to you. Not because they never occurred, but because you can now see the whole picture. Not just the altered version they wanted you to remember. They are vulnerable if they do not use this method. There's nothing left to manipulate. I can no longer remember when. No more guilt trips disguised as kindness. You're no longer emotionally receptive to revisionist history. They are strangled on the very memories they used to weaponize, because they are the only one who is still stuck in the past. Number 8. They are watching someone they previously took for granted become untouchable. They aren't just upset because you left. They are astounded by who you become as a consequence of your decisions. When they had access to you, they treated you as if you were disposable. They overlooked your value, downplayed your brilliance, and assumed that your presence was a given. They expected you'd be waiting, always prepared, always stuck, trying to prove your worth. But you didn't simply leave. You reached a higher level. You started to heal. You grew more concerned with your progress. And the version of you they see from a distance no longer looks like the one they used to influence. You developed in ways they never imagined. You started walking with confidence. Your energy shifted. You started speaking clearly, living with concentration, and setting limits like they were second nature. You no longer seek affirmation. You are the validation. And this is the most difficult thing for them. The world has taken notice. People are drawn to your zeal, strength, and wisdom. You become magnetic without having to beg, bend, or break to get someone's interest. They are not suffering heartbreak today. It's a shame, because they know what they have. They just didn't think anybody else would see it. They imagined you'd always be overlooked, that your worth would remain hidden as long as they made you doubt yourself. But now you're sparkling. Not because they eventually recognized you, but because you did. They're seeing someone they previously classified as forgettable become unforgettable. You exude an unmistakable radiance. And the pain they're feeling now isn't only from losing you. It means knowing they will never have access to you again. They realized too late that you were a gift, the real and uncommon one. And they botched it, thinking you'd never find out. They persuaded themselves that you weren't all that. You wouldn't be noticed, and they could do better. But now they sit calmly, watching you become all they secretly feared. Untouchable, unable, and totally unforgettable. Number 9. Your limitations are a language that others are unwilling to learn but cannot escape. You gave them every chance to do right by you. You weren't cruel. You weren't cruel. You were clear. You politely stated your constraints. You explained what hurt you. And you clarified what was no longer acceptable. Despite this, they continue to test you since they did not respect your boundaries. They saw your charity as a sign of weakness. Your forgiveness was a reset button. Your affection was certain. They saw your rejection as an effort to convince me. They saw your standards as concepts, not a line in the sand. However, when you finally made that decision, not out of rage but out of clarity, everything changed. You didn't shout. You didn't make a great announcement. You just moved differently. The door closed silently, and now they're the ones left chatting to the quiet, bewildered and annoyed that the old games don't work. They have no concept how to deal with someone who cannot be coerced, seduced, or tricked into submitting. They do not grasp your limitations. They cannot understand how someone can say no without flinching. How can someone walk away and really mean it? Manipulators are completely surprised by such emotional self-respect since it signifies a shift in authority. They utilize to capitalize on your hesitation, overthinking, and fear of confrontation. They used your generosity as a technique. But you've reclaimed it all, and you're no longer peaceful and serene. Grounded is more powerful than any war you could have waged. They can't argue with it. They can't distort it. They are unable to make it work for them. They're losing their heads, not because you yelled, but because you didn't. Your silence is driven by devotion, not weakness. And they realize that you do not owe them another conversation, chance, or second of your time. You have spoken everything you needed to say. Also, establish limitations for yourself. They are not open for argument. They are not an appeal for attention. They herald the end of a chapter that should have been completed long ago. Number 10. They wanted you back, but only if you return broken. They don't want you back. They like the broken version of you, which is simpler to manage. Someone who apologized for something you didn't do, who conveyed your sadness to those who were determined to misunderstand it, and who stayed devoted while being gradually destroyed. That was the version they felt most confident with. You weren't a threat when you questioned yourself. You were not scary when you shrank to make them feel comfortable. That version of yourself gave them the upper hand. And now that it's gone, they're not sure how to deal with who you've become. They are not reaching out because their circumstances have changed. They reached out because you did. And your development disrupts the same dynamic that they previously thrived on. You used to bend to remain calm. You are now the peacekeeper, and you will not tolerate anybody who disrupts it. That transformation in you, that inner strength, clarity, and determination to settle for less, it makes them feel powerless since the strategies they try to keep you close no longer work. You're no longer affected by guilt. You do not fall into emotional traps. You don't feel pressured to demonstrate your worth to someone who has repeatedly neglected it. And this is what is driving the hysteria. They can't control the healed version of you since it sees beyond the cycle. They cannot gaslight you since you have regained your senses. They can't control your emotions now that you've decided to believe your intuition. You have built a new version of yourself that does not need love, and they do not have access to it. They're now stuck in a loop, trying to summon the version of you that they destroyed. The person who would have answered the phone turned up and offered another chance. But that person does not exist anymore. You buried them. And every time they go to the past, they come up empty-handed since healing destroyed the version of you that used to legitimize their dysfunction. They wanted you back, but in bits. You're no longer helpful to their game now that you've been cured. And they're not suffering heartbreak. It's rage at losing the one version of you they've ever known how to exploit. Number your healing did not just liberate you. It revealed the whole game. Your healing did not only set you free. It shattered the illusion while you were still in survival mode, trying to earn their respect or understand their contradictions. You couldn't see precisely what was happening. You were too focused with extinguishing emotional fires to notice who kept lighting the match. However, once you started truly healing rather than fake or suppressing, something amazing happened. You have stopped blaming yourself. You started connecting the dots. You noticed the patterns, triggers, and how they twisted stories to make you doubt your own reality. With that, the whole game became evident. You knew it wasn't about love. It was all about control. You saw how they utilized shame to diminish you, silence to punish you, and tenderness as a reward for following their script. You observed how they altered. Blame, withhold assistance, and only show up when it suits them. Nothing was accidental. None of this was intended. It was calculated. You've finally seen the blueprint. Now that you are no longer emotionally attached, your presence jeopardizes what they have accomplished via lying. You don't flinch any longer. You don't play along. You are not puzzled, disturbed, or craving for their approval. And this worries them. Because a person who has been healed and can see clearly cannot be fooled or disarmed. You are acquainted with the approaches. You speak the language but refuse to participate. You are now a danger to their image, not because you are intending to expose them, but because your freedom eventually reveals what they were trying to hide. People could notice a difference in you. Your article speaks louder than theirs. Your elevation casts doubt on their account of events, which is their primary concern. Not retribution or conflict, but clear proof that they were not the victim. They were the architects of your agony. Healing converted you into something they couldn't handle, the mirror. Now, just being honest to yourself makes their existence more difficult to maintain. You didn't just abandon the game. You broke it. And now they're attempting to rewrite a story that no longer makes sense to you. No more playing the fool. A number. Their guilt does not lead to repentance. It is triggering a mental breakdown. Their guilt isn't supporting growth. It's generating mayhem. Because deep down, they are not having an awakening. They're having a breakdown. And the difference matters. True repentance requires accountability, humility, and a sincere desire to change. However, they are terrified. It is an ego meltdown. It's the misery of realizing too late that the person they ignored, mistreated, and discarded was the rarest thing they'd ever owned. And now you are completely out of reach. They don't regret what they did. They are sad that they were disclosed. They're disappointed that they no longer have the access they took for granted. They apologized. The narrative has shifted, and everyone now understands the truth. Because they were so focused on treating you as if you were disposable that they never considered what it would be like to see you triumph. Not just without them, but in spite of them. They are now experiencing a mental, emotional, and spiritual downward spiral. They felt they would always have control over the story. They imagined they'd always be the one who seemed stronger, more stable, and more attractive. But witnessing you heal, develop, and go forward without bitterness shattered the illusion. You didn't just survive, you became untouchable. Nothing bothers a person more than the realization that they no longer have easy access to what they formerly had, especially because it has become 10 times more valuable. They are unable to fix it, not because it is impossible, but because it has never included an error. It was about a trend. They never wanted to break the pattern until they lost the one person who saw them, loved them, and then walked away when they'd had enough. And now they're suffocating on their own humiliation. Not the type that changes you, but the kind that tears you when you realize you've ruined something sacred and will never have another chance. This isn't growth. It's desperation. It's the unraveling of someone who discovers what they discarded was more than just valuable. It was irreplaceable. And now, without a mask to hide behind and no one to blame, they're drowning in the consequences they said would never happen. A number. You didn't simply leave. You let the door to rust off its hinges. You did not leave to deliver a statement. You left because staying would have destroyed you. And you did not saunter for show. This was not a performance. It was the quietest and most powerful decision you had ever made. You didn't storm out, hoping they'd see your worth and rush after you with apologies and promises. You did not leave a back door open or suggest that you would be available if circumstances altered. You didn't even slam the door. You let it deteriorate. You let the whole structure to crumble because you recognized that any doorway built on lie, misunderstanding, and emotional exhaustion was not worth returning to. There was no grand goodbye or last warning, just distance, calm, and stillness. And the silence is now louder than any discussion you've ever seen because they expected a response. They expected tears, chaos, or at the very least an appeal for understanding. Instead, they got a total, clean, and permanent absence. And it is torturing them. They are unable to fathom it. They have no idea what to say to someone who does not play the game. They are used to managing the departure, changing the story, and reappearing when it is appropriate. But with you, the script collapsed. You didn't simply abandon their world. You have left their system. And that sort of departure is disastrous for individuals who depend on access to your spirit to boost their ego. Now they're trapped in place, staring at a door that no longer exists. The worst part is that they are well aware that they will be unable to trace you wherever you go. Your progress highlighted their limits. Your calmness made their chaos uncomfortable. Your silence indicated that what you stated was not exaggerated. They refused to face the facts. They believed they could use guilt to draw you back in. They thought they could use breadcrumbs to keep you captive. But you didn't merely go forward. You evolved. And once you've experienced true healing, you don't go back to just living in order to make others feel better. You allowed the past to dissolve. You allowed the door to deteriorate. You fled barefoot, fearless and free. That's not retribution. That is what true liberty looks like. It terrifies them. A number. You are not their answer. That's what has them enraged. They thought you were merely taking up space. They do not change their minds on the conclusion. They always had time. They assumed that once things calmed down and the mayhem they craved was over, they'd be able to return to you. And you would be present. Perhaps a little cautious and detached. But it is still open. Still waiting. Still holding the door. They never considered the fact that you were not hesitant. You were healing. You weren't waiting. You were wrapping up chapters. They felt they had the right to finish. They'd always anticipated having a last word, or at the very least the option to redeem themselves when they were ready. However, you are now unreachable. Not because you are hiding, but because you have completed. That's what has them enraged. You didn't need an apology to move on. You didn't need a long explanation or an emotional farewell. You gave yourself the peace they never had the courage to give you. You healed your own wounds, found closure, and left with your head held high and your soul unharmed. That is something their ego cannot handle. You did not need them to find healing. You didn't sit around expecting things would change. You didn't leave a letter in the bottle for them to locate later. You created your own ending, one that lacked their voice, approbation, or delayed sadness. And now they're stuck in a loop. They can't leave since closure was supposed to come on their terms. But you flipped the script. You made peace without the performance. You made peace without expecting them to confess what they had done. And the version of you that they anticipated to see again is no longer there. They encouraged you to seek solutions. But you want peace over solutions. You pick forward over the whole circle. And that type of authority, that kind of self-worth, it's the one thing their ego can't get over, since it means the story is done and they're no longer the lead character. You didn't just walk away. You woke up. And that insight did not just change your life. It collapsed. Every illusion they crafted centered around your silence, compassion, and dedication. You were never weak. You were caring. You weren't confused. You were only hoping they would approach you with the same enthusiasm. You did not object when they mistook your heart for a doormat, however. You didn't beg Miros. And the magnitude of the surge startled them. They are now unraveling. Not because you hurt them, but because you won without revenge, without their apologies, and by finding your own closure, peace, and strength. And it is this kind of change that ruins their whole identity. They did not anticipate losing access. They didn't expect to witness the person they had disregarded become unapproachable, uncaring, and undeniably elevated. You've become the unreachable mirror, the unchangeable truth. They're haunted. Not by what you did to them, but by what they did to someone who really meant, "I love you." And now, no breadcrumb, lie, or performance can reach you because your spirit has moved from survival to sovereignty. The most poetic aspect was that you never needed to prove anything. Your absence conveyed everything. If this message has moved you and opened your eyes, don't keep it to yourself. Click the subscribe button right now to join a community of selected ones rising together. Press the like button to show that you're done settling for less and are ready to establish your power. Leave a comment below. Share your story, breakthrough, or what stuck out the most. Also, please share this video with someone who needs to hear it today. Your commitment goes beyond just offering assistance. It signals to the cosmos that you are committed to your own growth and repair. So let's work together to become stronger, wiser, and more free. The next leg of your journey starts here. God bless you.